I recently hit 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. That's insane. Oh my god. Hi, I'm the Gorilla of Destiny. You may remember me from a couple of shorts or one of my 2 long-form videos. I've been making Dungeons & Dragons and science content on TikTok and YouTube for about 3 or 4 years now. And so to celebrate getting 100,000 subscribers, I thought I'd do a big Q&A. And as you can probably tell by the video length, yeah, it's a big Q&A. You guys asked a lot of questions. So I'm going to put a couple of timestamps right here so that you can come back to this video or just go to whatever section you're interested in. I think it would be unreasonable to expect people to watch this entire thing in one go, but if you want to do that, then you are more than welcome to. So first, I think some introductions are in order. If you haven't heard of me before, I work on a series of different projects all related to D&D, science, or the combination of the two. My first real kind of big impact on social media was this thing called The Theory of Magic, which is a book that's just about trying to take the scientific method and apply it to the magic in Dungeons & Dragons. Since then, I've had even more D&D science like arcane engineering or arcane spectroscopy. And in one book, I even took real-life science and used that as inspiration for a whole load of D&D spells. Another one of my big overarching projects is spellwriting systems. So the first of these, the spellwriting guide, actually goes into the theory of how we made the wizard spellwriting system. And then mirroring that, the spell saying guide talks about how we could make names for the spells. And now, the kind of most recent version of all of these is my Wizard, Druid, Sorcerer, and Warlock spell compendiums, which are all different systems for writing down spells in D&D for each of these classes. And then on top of all of that, I also do a whole load of world building and map making stuff. So yeah, I'm doing a lot. I'm a very busy person. As a small side project, I'm currently finishing my PhD. You know, nothing too major. So if I ever sound stressed or on edge, it's because I am. But this video will be broadly focused on people's questions about these different projects that I am undertaking. In total, I got about 214 questions from 136 question askers. So you will see a few names coming up more than once. That's totally fine, I don't mind. And in fact, in this plot here, you can see that most people asked one question. But I had a few notable people that were asking loads of questions, so you'll be seeing their name come up. I've ordered the video based on how frequently different topics came up in the questions. So in this plot, we show the amount of questions we had pertaining to each topic. I'll actually start with some of the questions that were only one in that topic, and then we'll go through these from the most asked through to the least. Except to the end, where I answer one question I've been getting for years and years and years, which is why am I called the Gorilla of Destiny? The final point of order before we get into this, in the background I needed some B-roll footage because I don't want to just talk with my face. I am playing a lovely cozy game called Tiny Glade. And as I'm talking and answering questions, I'm going to be building little wizard towers. So maybe as you're watching this, you can speculate on what different wizards are living in these different places. If you like my work and you like the things I do, then the best way you can support me is by liking, sharing, subscribing, all that good stuff. All the books are available at my website, which I will have linked below. And if you really like the stuff I'm doing, then you can also find a link to my Patreon below, which is the best way of making sure that I can keep doing this as much as I can. And of course, there's a few benefits involved as well. So, without further ado, thank you for 100,000 subscribers and enjoy me answering so many questions. Okay, so now we're going to get into the Q&A proper. It's about time, we've done enough statistics. Daniel asks, what's the most interesting piece of machinery you could make with arcane engineering? So for those of you that don't know, arcane engineering is one of my books, and it's all about inventing a circuitry system for D&D inspired by real circuitry. On the last couple of pages of the book, I've got a couple of examples that I've made, and I'm going to show you my favorite one to kind of answer this question while not answering it. And picking a favorite of these is really hard. Some of them are really funny. So like we've got the do not press, which is just a button that if you press, it casts shatter on itself. But my favorite is hot potato. Now you'll need to read the book to understand exactly why this all works the way that it does. But the basic is we have a circuit that will cast heat metal when gates D and C are both on or 1. But before that we have another gate with 2 inputs, A and B. A is fed from a NOT gate, which means when the button isn't pressed it will be 1 and when the button is pressed it will be 0. and B comes from this initially uncharged capacitor. And again, the capacitor here isn't working the exact same as a real life capacitor, but it's like good enough for an analogy. So when you press the button on Hot Potato, that top wire, input A, will go to 0, but the bottom one will charge the capacitor, so now B is 1. So for as long as you're holding that button, the spell won't cast. But then, if you let go of the button, suddenly A and B will be 1, which means D will be 1, which means heat metal is cast. So in the book, I describe it as a metal ball that then gets thrown at people and they get told to catch. And of course, by the time they catch it, it will be white hot, which is very mean. And the reason I bring this up for the, what's the most interesting thing you can make with arcane engineering, I just don't know the answer. Maybe there isn't really an answer. It's kind of like saying what's the most interesting thing you could make with a circuit board. But at least of all the things I've made, this one is the one I find most interesting. Tim Pate asks, what's your favourite dice set and why? There was no way I was ever going to pronounce that in a reasonable way, but I will pronounce every letter. Just watch me. I'll try put photos on the screen, but my absolute favourite dice set, it's not like a dice set of all the different ones you're going to need in D&D, but like it's a set of D20s. And each of them represents different factions in the campaigns that I run. And so I keep these D20s special for when those factions are doing something. So like one of them is related to the big bad from the first campaign. Whenever he rolled, he used that die. No one else got to use it. Which meant if my players were ever not quite feeling a sense of dread, I could pick up and roll one of these faction die and they wouldn't know why. To be villainous is to be a dungeon master after all. Now we're going to move on to questions that I put into the map making category. There will be a bit of overlap here with some of the world building questions, but I'll try make sure not to repeat myself too much. But you know me, I never repeat myself, and I think in today's video I'm going to really make sure I try not to repeat myself. That's a dumb bit. Vanium Z asks, how long does it usually take for you to make your city maps? Specifically, how long did it take you to make that map with the giant ravine in the middle of it? By the way, thanks for being a super cool content creator. Thank you for being a super cool question asker. So city maps do generally just take a bit longer because there's a lot of finicky bits that need to get done. I would say I could knock out an entire city within 8 to 10 hours. And usually I do that over like 4 sessions of 2 hours each. So it's like one is just going to be an hour getting the entire kind of vibe of the city right, all the streets laid out. Then another 2 hours will probably be spent writing all the landmarks in, and then the last 4 hours are just filling in the details. Fluffy Owlbear asks, do you have a favourite map? It's got to be this map of my homebrew world, Orlean. This is the map I used for the first campaign I ever ran fully, like from level 1 to 20. I've drawn better maps, I've drawn more detailed maps, I've drawn ones that look nicer or are maybe more interesting, but just this one has so many fun memories across every inch of the map. There are very few places on this map that my players didn't see in some kind of fashion in the campaign, so I absolutely love it. But it's so hard to pick a favourite map. Like, I've got this other one, this one here, which is like a more updated version of Orlean. And you see what I mean? It's a better map. Like, it's better drawn in my opinion, and it covers more of what I want it to be. But it's not the one that I played the campaign with. Pretty Bird asks, how did you get into map making? I was bored in maths lectures. I wish I was joking, I really, really do, but honestly, it was like me and my friends were just kind of starting to get into the idea of playing D&D, and I was like, well, we'll need maps, and I'm so bored right now. So all my early maps are all drawn in a maths lecture I wasn't paying attention to, and then for some reason I barely passed that class. Do as I say, not as I did. Pay attention in your lectures. Ray asks a question which has a lot of words in it, so I'm just going to distill it down, but I'll put it all there so you can have a read for yourself. Ray asks, do you have any tips on how not to get lost in every little detail of an area when drawing a map? What types of information do you think should be prioritized? This is a really great question. It's actually really tough as well, especially when you're doing it for D&D and you don't necessarily know where your party's going to end up in a city or in a world or an island or anything. I think one of the big things is to focus on your big structures and big details first. So if you're looking at a world map, you want to say, where are the mountains? Where's the coastline? Where are the cities? And honestly, if you have that information, you could probably improvise a very fun D&D campaign with nothing else. Similarly, for cities, you want to talk about, okay, where are the city limits? Where is the kind of central part of the city, like the central authority? Where are the kind of landmarks that players like to interact with? So stuff like your Thieves Guild, your Assassins Guild. But the key is to focus on painting in very broad strokes at first. And there's a reason we say broad strokes. It's literally painting. You start with very broad strokes and then you work in on the finer details. And if we all had infinite time, I'm sure we would world build to a way where we have way too much detail. But we're playing D&D. We can improvise that detail as our players start moving around the world and engaging with it. And one advantage of that is that it then means you can be much more reactive to what the players are looking for, what they want to do on that day. Like if the campaign's been really serious for a while now, like they've had a lot of very sad losses, or they've been beaten by the bad guy in some big event, maybe it's good that you can have a bit of blank space that you can improvise in and say, okay, now there's a circus or a fun town where everyone's actually quite friendly. And it gives you, the game master, a bit more wiggle room on what your players can expect at different points. It's also worth noting that sometimes real life things happen and you've got to change your plans. Like maybe a player has been having a really bad couple of weeks and they're now here to play D&D and you're like, oh no, I was going to kill their character today. Having a bit of a vague map and a vague plan that you can improvise around, that's going to help you a lot. Sorry, got a bit off topic. The main point is start broad and then move into specifics. And if your players go somewhere that you've not seen before, you're always welcome to just bring out the big bit of paper and the pen and start live sketching the map for them there. They'll get it. We're all here to have fun, not to grade your maps. So long as everyone's having a good time, you're doing a good job. And that includes you too. Don't do things that aren't fun for the sake of their enjoyment. You're a player too. Josh asks, what are your inspirations for maps? So it really depends on the map, but a lot of the time it's like I want a very interesting geographic feature, or, the spell cities is a good example of taking something and saying, I just want this on a map level scale. But a lot of the time it's me looking at something in the real world and being like, I want to see that as a fantasy map. Or because I want to tell a story there, and more often than not, a story there with my friends through D&D. Celeste asks, what's your favourite map you've designed based on a spell so far? I mean, it was the first one I did, but unfortunately it was also the best one I did, Hold Monster. Narratively, it's such a cool idea, in my opinion. It really opens up a lot of really fun campaign ideas. And honestly, I just think it looks the best of all of them. But if you can't tell, I am very partial to a narrative, so that might just be why I prefer that. Abraham E. asks, how would you suggest I start learning how to draw maps? Like, what was your start? The absolute best way of learning these things is practice, I'm so sorry. But one of the best ways of getting better at any kind of art, especially map making, I've found, is to look at the other maps people are making and decide what do you like about their maps that you would want to be able to do yourself. So for me, I spend a lot of time just looking at maps like Middle Earth and being like, I want that, I want to be able to do that. And then you pick a feature, like pick a mountain and just practice drawing mountains. There's also some just really incredible people out there for teaching people how to make maps. I highly recommend Sketch Alaska. I'll put a link to their TikTok down below if I remember. If I don't remember, someone shout at me until I do. But they're amazing. Give them a follow and tell them I sent you. And no, we don't know each other. He doesn't know I'm doing this, so I hope it will be a pleasant surprise and not at all a horrifying moment. In a similar vein, Dungeon Master's Diary is absolutely amazing. Again, just check out all their stuff. I'll also put their link below. Ethan asks, when you make a city, how do you think about making the city feel fun for your D&D party to play in? I am working on a campaign right now and worry about making cities feel like a slog and try and get through quickly. So there's a few things you can do to help. One is to make clear landmarks that your players can go and interact with. I actually really recommend playing The Witcher 3 for this. If you go to the main city there, you kind of get an idea of how you should run a city that feels alive and fun. Like, give them people they're regularly talking to that are centered in the city, like a guild or maybe a kind of very rich merchant. And think about what a city is and what it can be in this fantasy world, right? It's the most developed place of your fantasy worlds, and so it's where you might get like sewer adventures or big theatre productions, or maybe you go and meet the king, because cities are the centre of political power as well. Cities are very different, and I feel like a lot of D&D parties might just not want to interact with the city in the same way they would the countryside. And honestly, that's also okay. I find the best way of making sure no part of your D&D world feels like a slog is to make sure your players have the option to leave. If they're not having fun, if it is a slog, then they will. But you can help get them engaged with the city by giving them some incentive and some things they can work in. Some D&D nerd asks, how do you get your lines so clean? Okay, so this is going to answer a question a lot of people have asked, so I'm just going to say it now. 1, use good quality paper. I am 120 GSM, I think. I don't know. Honestly, any good pad of drawing paper, that'll be fine. And then I use Muji pens. I use the 0.5 and the 0.7 ones. If you give a firm press, you'll get some nice and clean lines. But unfortunately, with all things, it also just comes down to practice. Matthew asks, what is your favourite twist or interesting feature you've put on one or some maps? Also, what kind of points of interest do you like to add on them to make them more interesting to explore? I'll answer the second part first. Ruins are great if people want to explore and they see a ruin. You can always have a bit of fun there. As are wee towns. There's a lot of stuff happening in wee towns, and it just makes for excellent little stories that your D&D party can latch onto. As for points of interest, I think one of the favourite that I've done in any of my D&D campaigns is in this map here, the Malados. You will see pretty quickly there's a few bits of interest, but the big one is all of these mountains that have smoke plumes coming out. Now, these are arcane volcanoes. When they erupt, they effectively roll on the wild magic table, but I made a slightly modified version for the campaign. So it's like you roll on a D100 and then it'll have a different effect, some of which are really good for the area around it, and some of which are really bad. Miriam asks, is this at all inspired by Full Metal Alchemist and their cities? No. So I'm aware now, mostly from commenters, that my spell cities are a thing in Full Metal Alchemist, I believe. Or there's another one as well that I think it's very similar to, but that might be the Spellwriting rather than... Not the point. I've never actually seen or read Full Metal Alchemist. I'm aware of it, but I've never really engaged with it. I might have heard the idea at some time previously of like a spell city, and maybe that's what helped me get the idea, but if so, I've completely forgotten it by now. The origin of the spell city really is just me saying, okay, well, I've made a spell writing system. What if I use that as a basis for the map making that I also like doing that's kind of separate? Napoleon asks, will you be mapping any towns in Europe, perhaps in and around small Belgian towns? I'm sorry, who let you out of your tomb? I saw it. It's a very nice tomb. Stay there. We have enough going on in the world right now. Genuinely, please, just wished. Okay, I know they're taking the piss, but I actually do have an answer to this in that I would love to start mapping real world cities. It's just that the road networks are so complicated, it's really annoying. And there are so many buildings, oh my god. Sounds like a right pain in the arse, but I might do it one day, especially if I develop just a huge amount of patience. Riggs asks, what is your favourite city in your maps and why is it your favourite? Again, this is so tough because it's not my favourite city map, which is this one here, Solara, but it's my favourite city. I think my favourite is this one, the city of Huey, that I'm going to put up a map of. It's actually very old as far as my maps go. I drew this like, I don't want to answer how long ago. I'm going to guess 2020 or 2021, but I love this city so much. To give an idea, one of my favourite landmarks in this is Jorah's temple. So Jorah is the god of time in my D&D world. He is commonly seen as a shepherd with his dog, who is the moon, and he shepherds the souls of the worthy dead, which are the stars. So on the top of Jorah's temple, there's this huge white dome. And on top of that is a giant statue of Jorah and Moon, his dog, walking atop the dome. And then in the dome we have these little crystal fibers that have been built into the rock so that when you're sat inside in the temple, you can look up and it looks like a starry night, even in the middle of day. There's a lot going on in this city. I need to make a way better map. Oh, I love it so much. Glaurung asks, do you take commissions for maps? At the moment, no. I just don't have time, finishing up my PhD and doing all the other things I do. I just don't have time for more deadlines and more stress. And sometimes with maps, I worry that if I made a mistake on like a client piece, I would be just so mortified. And so at the moment, I'm like, I don't know if I want to deal with all that stress. But, the bills have got to pay themselves at some point, so... Nick asks, would you be able to show us your old maps? Yes, fine. So you know how earlier I said I drew maps in maths lectures? These are the maps I was drawing in maths lectures. And if that doesn't give you hope that you too can in one day be like me, I don't know what to tell you. They're rubbish. These are fine. They're good for a starting point, but it's quite painful for me to look at them now. Okay, so now we're going to be moving on to the questions that are all about magic theory. Some of these are very technical, and while I really appreciate them, they don't really work in this format of video. So while there will be a few that I get into the weeds with, there's also a couple that either it's just I don't answer because I think it'll take too long to get into it, or because it's a good enough question, I don't actually have the answer right now. Theo asks, how could you apply other sciences to D&D, such as psychology or biology? So I think you would do it in the same way that I did the theory of magic. You've got to look at the rules of D&D and use them as your basis for this theory that you want to develop. So for biology, you would want to look at the monster manual, or you'd want to look at what monsters there are in D&D and maybe see if you can find some underlying theory that could help unify them. I think another interesting one that people did ask about a fair bit was like chemistry and alchemy. You could look at all the potions and try and build a theory that manages to capture what we see with a D&D style potion. These are, of course, very different sciences to what I'm used to, which is very physics and astronomy, so how it will exactly look will probably be quite different to my D&D science stuff. But fundamentally, I think they'd be the exact same. Now, you also asked about psychology. That I have no idea about. Not just because I don't know that much about psychology, which is true, but also because I'm not entirely sure what you would be basing it off of in the rules of D&D. Now, you could probably do some really interesting real-life psychology on D&D as a concept, but that is slightly different from a science in-universe. Clover asks, how do you feel about the philosophy of magic, and how do you think that pertains to the science of magic, if at all? So I'm no philosopher, right? I'm not going to pretend I am. I am not well read on these things. The closest I have is I did once read a book on the philosophy of science, so just to give an idea of how out of my depth I am. But what I would say from what I know is that the way we approached making a scientific theory of D&D is by following the philosophy of science. And so immediately there's already a very strong link between what I've done and the philosophy of magic. But as for the rest of it, that I have no idea. I'm totally... Nope, nothing. I don't know. Sorry. Samuel asks, what inspired you to begin incorporating science into D&D? This is a really complicated one because I actually kind of can't remember exactly what it was that set this off in my head. I think, so I've always wanted to be a science communicator. I love it. I love giving all the talks and I love going out and meeting people, running stalls at science festivals, that kind of thing. It's actually one of the reasons why I did a PhD in the first place. And so after I finished my master's, but before I did my PhD, I was thinking about my love of D&D and also what am I going to do with this? I really want to be a science communicator, but I don't really know how. And at the time, I had a TikTok account that was mostly about drawing maps, and I had like less than 1,000 followers, I think between like 400 and 500, which, to be clear, I was so proud of at the time, and frankly, I still am. That was a lot for what I was doing. So I decided, I think I was actually in the gym at the time, I was like, when I get home, I'm going to try and take this idea of science, the idea of how do we find new things out about our universe, and apply it to D&D. And I had no big plan, I hadn't figured it out on that day, and that's when I made my first video about the theory of magic. And since then, it kind of just spiraled out of control. A Mello asks, sorry if you've already answered this, but how long/what does it take to organise a magic theory? Real time and lore time if you want to have fun. I always want to have fun, so I'll give both. Real time to get the first theory of magic was like 3 months, I think. As for what it takes, a whole lot of work. It took a lot of people in an amazing community who were constantly throwing ideas at me. And while not all of them stuck, actually, I would say most of them didn't, just having that space, that was the most valuable thing. That's what it takes to do this. Science is about collaboration, and I would be lying if I said I did it all on my own, even though all my books do have Gorilla of Destinies with like, but still not the point. And for lore time, it's probably close to the reality as well. It's never ending, right? Like science is a constantly evolving thing. We're constantly changing our understanding or the theories behind stuff. We're always finding little bits that our model isn't quite able to incorporate. And so the actual, out of universe, the theory of magic, the book is done, but the theory itself, very much still evolving. And I think in lore, this would be true as well. But I guess if I had to put a number on how long it would take for the in-universe Gorilla of Destiny Archmage of the University of Theoretical Magic to go from nothing to having this, I would give it about 5 or 10 years. Rashminder asks, what do you do or think when no one around you likes what you're doing, in fact say bad things about it? What would you feel when someone destroys one of your papers about magic system in D&D? So, I've never had to deal with this within Dungeons & Dragons, but I do have this in the real world. Okay, so it wasn't as bad as is being described in the question, but it certainly evoked the same kind of feelings because to me it felt like someone was saying that. It sucks. It really is tough, especially if you really care about something you're doing and you're writing this paper and you put huge amounts of effort into something and then someone turns around and just goes, that's rubbish. It's badly written. I don't like it. I don't think any of this is any good or worthwhile. It's so hard. It's probably one of the hardest things about being a modern scientist is that you will occasionally have to go through that. And sometimes the person saying that has a very valuable point to be made. Sometimes they're just an asshole. So, in terms of answering the question, what would I feel about it? I would feel bad. Now, I am going to quickly give a bit of unsolicited advice about what you should do if you find yourself in that situation. The absolute first step, take a big breath, go sit down somewhere that's very relaxing to you. Not your desk. For me, it's usually a bench in a park or something like that, somewhere where I can get some sunlight. Take a moment, have a breath, just disconnect for a little second. As I kind of said, a lot of these works that we do in science, even though they're not supposed to be personal, we feel very personally attached to. I feel very personally attached to my thesis right now. Because while to someone else it just looks like a collection of random bits of work and maybe it's not very well written because I've had to rush so much of it, to me it is a monument to a huge amount of effort and energy and stress and upset and joy, and it's all wrapped into this document that someone else might just not care about. And so when you get these comments, it's very easy to feel very attacked and get very defensive and or maybe, spiral out, get really anxious or very upset by it. And that's perfectly natural. That's so human. That's just you being a person in a field that sometimes likes to pretend it's not full of humans. After you've had that pause, it can then be useful to think, okay, were they actually attacking this or were they making comments? And just because of how much I care about this, were those comments perceived as an attack by me? Sometimes they do just have a lot of good points to make and it can feel like an attack, when in fact it's not, or maybe they're a bit blunt about it, but actually if you look at it, it's not so bad. But sometimes they are just really shit. A friend of mine once had comments that said, this paragraph here is just you making a big emotional appeal to your own superiority, which I promise is not what was going on there. With respect, it was some of the driest scientific writing in the world. At that point, you've got to take another second, look inwards and go, okay, they don't have a point. They're just being a dick. There's a lot of advice about this, and it's a lot of things that I talk about and say, this is what you should do, this is what you shouldn't do. It's really hard right now. When you're in the moment, it's tough. For me, just recording this, it's so easy to be just take a moment and breathe. Me, in the office, when someone pulls my research apart, I'm not calm and breathing. Your experience may vary, but certainly that's advice that has helped me out of quite a lot of upsetting situations. Whew. Anyway, God, you wouldn't know this is the section about magic theory, would you? I'm going to try and keep it lighthearted from now. I'm so sorry. Emily asks, and I'm just going to shorten it for this one, where do magic casters get the energy for spells from? So this is something we've hypothesized about in the theory of magic, though it's kind of hard to know exactly what the answer will be. The weave, or the magic field, is everywhere all the time, and it's in a state we call quasi-stable. And our model was that a person, would put a little bit of energy into that field, and then that would cause a huge collapse into giving back a lot of energy. You can kind of think of it like you were to push a boulder just a little bit up a small incline, and then it falls off a cliff. You as the caster are giving it just that little bit of push for it to then fall and release this huge amount of energy that then gets manipulated. And this energy is then transported via the magic field as a wave. So where do casters get the energy that they're using to push the ball up the hill a little bit? Their breakfast. Make sure to eat a good breakfast and all your fiber and vitamins. Aspiring arcane biologist, hell yeah, I hope you do one day, asks, if cities are able to be imbued with spells, can other structures with nodes and lines be able to utilize the same logic to activate spells? So this is an important caveat to all my spell city stuff, is that strictly by the rules that I've made in my theory of magic, they don't really work. I know, I'm so sorry, please stop booing and throwing things at your screen. The spell writing system is really just a way of noting down all the important aspects of a spell. And so writing it down wouldn't actually have any impact on the magic field. But there are two things to say about that and the reason why I kind of justify the spell cities in my head. One is that if you are writing one of these things down, kind of by muscle memory alone, you might end up casting the spell. Kind of like how sometimes if you're reading a sentence, your lips will move a little bit, just as if you were saying them out loud. And then the other, I think more important thing, is that we're having fun here. We're meant to be working with magic, not like just pure science. As laid out, just putting all these symbols into one place will not cast the spell. But that's way more boring than a city that is a hold monster spell. We're playing with magic. You're allowed to bend the rules. Maybe make it so that the gods see that and then imbue it with that enchantment. Or that the symbols being made with the city are purely symbolic to a deeper spell being cast. So it isn't the street layout that's making the fireball be cast. Instead, it's that there's something else that is making that happen, and the layout is maybe just notation from those that made it happen in the first place. But the key to remember, always, is if you want to tell a story, unless you're really wanting a system that's very hard magic and limited by these things, don't put that on yourself. Unless, again, if you want to, you can. I don't want to for the spell cities. Sophie asks, I believe that the weave is the field associated with magic, brackets, if I'm wrong, sorry, and then me, brackets. You're not wrong, you're absolutely right, so don't apologise. Back to her. But does the field have an associated particle, and if so, how does this particle behave? The short answer that I can think of right now is no, but it does get a little bit complicated. At the moment, we treat our spells much like a quantum wave, in that it exists on the weave as a wave that is moving, and then when it hits its target, that's our observation, and that causes the wave function to collapse. And so it isn't a particle in that sense, it's a wave, but in quantum mechanics we have something called wave-particle duality, where quantum particles show behavior that is both wave-like and some behavior that is particle-like. So while I don't have a specific answer for this, I think you could argue that the particle itself is the spell, especially after that wave function has collapsed. But it's really nuanced, so that's an excellent question, really well asked. I should think about that more, actually. Imaginary Beehive asks, how would magical materials exist? So I see this very analogous to something like maybe a magnetic field, where this material, for some reason, some, background material science thing, interacts with the magic field. What this effect is, or how it does this, these are all things that I think I want to think about more. I really want to do something that's like the theory of enchanting stuff, because I love that. I would love to have a really proper system built for it. But as of right now, I do not have a solid theory for this. I just have some hand-waving answers. But it's definitely something I want to look at in the future. Mutated Zombie Bush asks, do you have any scientific explanation for the barrier that seems to exist between 5th and 6th level spells? My understanding, or my theory, my hypothesis of why this is the case is related to what we discussed earlier with the quasi-stable fields. When you push the field, so not only do you need to be able to push the field hard enough to get to the hill that will then collapse down into the 6th level spells, you then also need to be able to handle the amount of energy that comes back from that. And since wizards have studied this, they're very prepared, and sorcerers have that innate ability, they will be able to handle that amount of energy. Whereas a warlock, whose understanding of magic is something that's given to them innately by some other creature, might not have the fundamental understanding required to handle that much magic response. This may just be that you need to have that understanding. It might be that their patrons aren't able to imbue that level of understanding easily. And maybe more interestingly, when we're talking about warlocks, we've got to remember there is a social aspect to this, right? Maybe there's a reason their patrons don't want them to have spell level 6 and above. It's all well and good having a powerful warlock, but you don't want them getting too big for their boots, do you know? RJ asks, how would you explain leveling up in your magic theory? This is actually a really interesting and very fundamental question about the design of magic theory. The basis of magic theory is the rules of D&D. But I don't know if you guys have heard, D&D is a game designed for people to play to have fun, not to be analysed for science. And so one thing you've got to be constantly aware of is this idea that not every rule is actually a piece of evidence. Maybe it's just something that is done to make things easier for the player, or as a game design choice that isn't reflective of anything actually in the reality of the game. And so things like spell slot levels I've taken as hard evidence in the game, whereas things like player levels, even though that relates to what spells you can and can't cast, I take as a simplification by the game in order to, make it playable. The perfect example of this is if you're using a square grid in your game, if you go up, you move 5 feet. If you go across, you move 5 feet. And if you go on the diagonal, you also move 5 feet, which isn't true. That's not how physics works. So there are ways of designing your space so that this kind of holds true, but I don't want to get into it right now. The point is that this is a design decision made by the game designers so that it is easier for you and your friends to play and enjoy the game. And further evidence to this being the case is the fact that you can also use a hexagonal grid. So yeah, that's actually a really interesting and quite fundamental question about how we design magic theory. Tom asks, what's the best way to integrate wild magic, chaos, infernal, or where magic expression is based on the will of supernatural entities and not strictly defined systems? So wild magic is a bit easier. Sorcerers are idiots that didn't do any studying, and so they lose control of their magic sometimes. That's on them. They should have done the reading. As for more of these, will-based entities, so stuff like gods I think could fall into this, I take them as very powerful magic users. Us mere mortal wizards are kind of limited by what we know is a stable way of interacting with the weave. Whereas these other creatures that, don't really interact with magic in the same way that mortals do, or have been around for long enough to figure more stuff out, they will be able to do much more nuanced and very expressive casting. It's almost just like a technology gap more than it is anything fundamental to the magic theory. The magic is fundamentally the same for them, they just know more than us. And that's what I'm aiming to fix. Gemini asks, given that spells can be represented as waveforms, what would it look like if two of the same or different spells collided? So this is really cool. This is a very fun bit of real life science. I don't know if I'm going to bother animating something over this, so good luck imagining it in your head. Draw along with the Gorilla of Destiny. Do your own animation at home so he doesn't have to. If we have two waves overlapping, they just add together. So if you have two different waves that have different equations and you put them in the same medium, then the new wave that you get will just be the sum of those two individual waves. So if our waves are in phase, which means that where one is high, the other one is also high, they will give what we call constructive interference. So they'll add together and make a new bigger wave. But then if they're out of phase, and so we have one going high as the other goes low, they will have destructive interference where they cancel each other out a little bit. If we have two of the same wave, so the same spell in this case, interacting like this, we will either get a new wave that has double the amplitude as we get constructive interference, or if it is half a wavelength out in phase, if I remember my numbers right, but basically like if one is the negative of the other, we will get a perfect cancellation. But, and this is where it gets even more exciting and complicated, since our waves are wave packets and not just like simple sine waves, as they're moving past each other, they may cancel out at one exact moment, but then they'll just keep going. So if you want to do constructive or destructive interference in a way that matters, you need to time it in such a way that you will get this perfect overlap or kind of perfect mirroring. This is one of my ideas for how Counterspell works at the moment, but I don't have anything too specific right now. But yeah, good question, because I got to talk about real science, and I love doing that. Fiari asks, oh, that's a lot of words. Hang on, I'm going to shorten this down to say I'd not read this one in advance. I'm sorry, Fiari. Okay, so basically it is that in the past, the wizards were able to cast up to 13th level spells. And then the laws of the universe were written because wizards just couldn't be trusted, which I don't know what they could possibly mean by that. So what is the difference before and after? So I would say that most likely, if I was the one rewriting the laws of the universe, I would change how much energy is required for you to make those level of spells appear. And so maybe you design it in such a way that mortals would not be able to withstand or give the amount of energy required to force the field to collapse into the 10th level energy requirements. And one cool thing about this in the magic theory is that effectively it just means switching out some of the numbers and increasing them just a little bit. So if you wanted an equivalent in the real world, I guess pick an equation with a fundamental constant like Planck's constant and then change it. Don't do that. If you get the ability to, like you meet a genie, please don't change any of the fundamental constants. We've worked so hard trying to get them. And we know someone's messing around with Hubble's constant, so just stop it. Pyrotech Engineer asks, have you tried to make your own power system / magic system? And then how far did you get? So the answer is no, not yet. If I was to design a magic system, I would like to design it like a programming language. I want something that is essentially Turing complete, but it's really difficult to know then how that would engage with a game system or, just fiction in general. How satisfying would it be? And, I say programming language and Turing complete, but is that something you actually want in a magic system? Maybe I just want something that's more like vector calculus. So, short answer is no, I've not done anything, but I do have a couple of ideas that I'm playing with. At the moment, though, I've nothing to show. Stranger asks, any idea how you would design ley lines? Ley lines are fascinating, right? Like in this setting that I've made, in this magic theory idea that I've got, how do we do ley lines? So I would make them in some way like field or areas of the magic field that are more responsive to magic. Like we've talked a lot about this idea of the quasi-stability and the giving energy and getting it back. These constants that make that relationship don't necessarily have to be the same everywhere in the universe. And maybe ley lines are just areas where these constants are more favorable to magic and make magic much easier to cast. And again, because we're dealing with magic, I think that opens up a whole lot of really interesting world building ideas. Like, what if the reason these have been tweaked is because of past actions of wizards or gods? Maybe, we're talking about the 10th level stuff that you're not allowed to cast. Maybe in order to do that, to tighten the field in one place, they had to make it a little bit more relaxed in others, and that's what a ley line is. Oh, I love this kind of bit of magic theory where I've got the fundamental theory now, and it might not be totally true. We might totally replace it with something else, but it gives us a frame that we can use to try and explain the, and in quotes here, natural phenomena of our magic world. But then, I don't know, maybe I'm misremembering what ley lines are in D&D. I can't remember specifically, so maybe I'm wrong. It's fine, I'll be able to hand-wave another explanation, it's fine. Riggs asks, I'm thinking about my own theory of magic based off of string theory. Where'd be a good place to start and how did you come up with the idea? So, we've talked a lot about the idea that you should just try and pick what bits of evidence in D&D you want to focus on. That's the main thing I think that will help you. Then, understand string theory. I don't understand string theory, so good luck to you. Not because I'm so clever that if I can't understand it, you can't, just in that it looks hard and I'm a coward. And finally, Baki asks, do I think that my mathematical and scientific work on theoretical magic could become fundamental for some undiscovered magic in the real world? Nah, probably not. Sorry. If there is magic in the real world, we will probably not call it magic, right? Like, we don't call quantum physics magic. Instead, we will probably just call it physics. If you want to study real world magic, study physics. Go, or any STEM field, really, just any of them. They're all amazing. And if magic is real, if we find something that we recognize as magic, it is very unlikely it will follow anything like D&D's rule system. So I really doubt any of my work will ever be useful for anything in the real world. And that goes for my PhD research too, just in a different way. So now I'm going to be moving on to questions that I couldn't really put into any other category other than just random or miscellaneous. That said, some of these are very good questions. Albert404 asks, what's my favourite kind of cheese? My favourite kind of cheese is cheddar cheese. Specifically, there's a smoked cheddar from the Isle of Arran. That's my favourite cheese ever, and I'm never going to change my mind. A Mellow asks, how are you doing? I'm very tired. I've just finished the first draft of my entire thesis and I'm waiting for my supervisors to read it over, so I'm coming down from a very prolonged period of very high stress. But thank you, I hope you're doing well as well. Pink asks, if you were to describe yourself with the type of muffin, what muffin would it be? Apple muffin. Levi asks, what's your favourite breed of puffin or penguin? I'll answer both. I like the Atlantic puffin because they're in Scotland, and I really like emperor penguins. They're just so, they're cute. The Big Yarg asks, have you played Kerbal Space Program before? Also, what's your favourite type of jam? I have. I was actually really bad at it because I didn't have any patience for it, and my favourite kind of jam is strawberry. Rosie asks, do you support trans people? Yes, I do. Trans rights are human rights and I'll always be there to support my trans friends. Any community ran by me will be trans inclusive, and if you disagree about that, then you are not welcome. Monkey of Fate asks, love your work, just wanted to ask, what are your favourite ways to relax after a long day of thesis writing? The big thing is I go to the gym and do a lot of weightlifting. That is the best way of kind of detoxing, I feel like. I hate to admit it after many years of saying it definitely wouldn't, but it really improves your mental health. Obviously, I have my stuff like my map making. I also do a pub quiz every week with some of my friends from my PhD. And then, of course, D&D if I was able to schedule it, or playing like video games and stuff. Which leads nicely into the next question. From Chest to Factory, what is your favourite game/games? So obviously I have a soft spot for Satisfactory. I've always been really big into building on Minecraft. Strategy games like Total War or Civilization as well, I could sink days into that without even thinking about it. Baldur's Gate because, you know, you've got D&D. And when you say games here, I'm imagining you're thinking about video games, but if we also then want to talk about TTRPGs, which I might as well, given the place, you know, the channel I'm at, D&D is number one. I love D&D so much. But it is important to try other TTRPG systems. So some of my favorites for that are the Star Wars RPG. I really like Star Wars, so it was great fun. We had an amazing GM for that. I also really like a game called Troika. I don't know how best to explain it, but Troika is to D&D what Discworld is to Lord of the Rings. Raven asks, how many real-world languages do you speak? So I would say I only speak English. I'm monolingual, which is a great shame. I wish I didn't. Mais je parle un peu français, mais c'est nul. Und ich spreche ein bisschen Deutsch. Though if I'm going to be honest, in French I could maybe hold like a very basic conversation and order food and get directions. In German I can maybe ask for 2 beers. I'm Not Bob asks, is there anything nerdy you've been thinking about that you haven't talked about on your channel? I guess other than my research, no. As a community, you guys are just so welcoming whenever I get really excited about a new random thing, and I just love that. So I don't feel like there's anything nerdy that I couldn't just post a video about and get some people going like, hey, that was really interesting, tell me more. And I love that. I love that about you guys so much. I do feel very lucky that my community up to this point just seems to be so curious and so intrigued by so many different things. Love you guys. Matt M asks, when? Not yet. Soon, but not yet. Riggs asks, do you play an instrument? If so, what instrument? So I've been playing piano since I was like 5 years old, but then when my granddad died, he made a lot of instruments as well. So I started learning the guitar when I got one of the ones he made. And also I used to do singing, up till recently, I was still very involved with a choir. I love music. One day I will make the Bard book and then I'll have to try and write some music based off of it. Daniel asks, are you open to being walked up to and asked for a selfie? Brackets on a side note, are you in the UK? I am in the UK, but I do also have an EU passport, and so I might not be in the UK for much longer. As for whether or not people want to take selfies with me, I mean, I doubt you would recognize me if I walked in the street, but sure, I might regret saying that one day, but I don't think I would mind. The only thing I'd say is that when I'm walking around, I look very angry, to a point where a friend's girlfriend had to ask him if I hated her, because whenever she would see me, I was just glowering and glaring, and I just looked so cross all the time. That's just me. Don't worry about that. Though I don't know if I've ever shown my face, so good luck. If you recognize my voice, that'll be the giveaway. And finally, TM Toolwolf asks, have you ever considered branching into other games, specifically 5e compatible games like Level Up or Tales of the Valiant that have larger pools of open content? At the moment, I don't have any plans to. Maybe in the future it's something I could look at, but I have to say that with D&D and D&D science, the reasons I picked D&D is one, that I'm very familiar with it, but also it is a very useful vehicle for this scientific outreach side of things that I really do want to achieve on some level. Where, it's not just that I'm familiar with it, but it's that a lot of people are familiar with it. And so instead of saying, first learn a new rule system and then learn a scientific system, I can at least guarantee people have some understanding or previous engagement with Dungeons and Dragons. Even if all it is that they've heard of D&D before, it still makes it a useful vehicle for the kind of work that I want to do. But, as I said earlier, you should definitely try and play non-D&D systems. They're really, really good, and it does show you maybe ways that you could improve your D&D games by showing you the real variety that you could have in a tabletop game, as well as understanding how different game mechanics can actually change the way that your players might engage with your world or your story or go about role-playing. So I mentioned the Star Wars RPG earlier, and I felt like, well, partly because it was in Star Wars, but partly the way that the dice system works, it was very easy to get into very cinematic events. Like, it felt like that's what you should be doing, and so both the GM and the players were incentivized to effectively act like they were in a Star Wars movie. It was very cool. I enjoyed it. Not everyone likes it, but I really enjoyed it. Now for the category that I really thought would be fourth on this list, it's going to be Dungeons and Dragons questions. Raven asks, what is your favorite D&D creature? This is the hardest question I will get in this entire Q&A. I love the Mimic and the Doppelganger because they're very good for messing with players a little bit. But then on the other hand, I love dragons. I think dragons are probably my favorite, especially not ancient level, but when they're level 10 and facing a dragon that's maybe just a little bit more powerful than they really should be fighting. It's absolutely amazing, and I'm always a big fan of having an intelligent dragon, because one thing I really like in a D&D fight is a bit of back and forth between the bad guy and the players. And I feel like dragons are the closest you can get to doing that while still having a monster to fight. Tripod Fish Enjoyer says, I'm trying to run a depressing campaign, but all of my friends think that it's a normal happy campaign because I'm normally making jokes and laughing a lot, and I can't seem to get the message across that it's depressing. Can you please give me some tips? So I'm going to caveat this with a first bit of advice, and then we'll talk about ways that you can get the kind of tone and vibe you want in a campaign. But it's just to say that it's really difficult to do that, to get a specific tone. If you want to play a depressing campaign, that's going to be tough, because D&D can be very silly and very funny. And not only that, oftentimes your players are coming in just wanting to have a bit of fun and play a game with their friends. And so a depressing campaign doesn't always mesh with the kind of vibe that the people want to bring or what they want to experience with this. The other thing to consider, of course, as well, is that, if you want to have a depressing campaign, that's one thing, but you can't have every session be depressing. Otherwise, people are not going to want to come and play. At least in my experience. So be aware that what you're trying to do is already really difficult, and maybe you should actually look at other systems than D&D that maybe help get this vibe across more properly. But on top of that, if you are playing D&D and you do want to have a depressing campaign, the best way of dealing with this is to talk to your players. In fact, this is kind of what session zeros are for. If you want to have a depressing campaign, you should talk to your players before the campaign and say, hey, this is the vibe that I want to be bringing, so please don't have any characters called who's it's, what's it's. And then you and your players can have that discussion early on in the campaign and avoid situations like this. If the campaign's already started, that's not, it's not too late. You can still have these conversations. I just think you need to go into it as well with this idea that maybe you'll say, well, I want this kind of campaign. And then your table will say, okay, but we don't want to play that. And then, you need to consider, Do you want to play a depressing campaign more than you want to play a game with these people? So I don't know if that was any help, but hopefully it gave some useful things. I don't know if I should do call to actions. I probably should. I'm not a very professional YouTuber, but if you're in the comments, maybe actually give a bit of advice. What would you do in this situation? Or what would you say? Do you think I was right? Do you think I'm wrong? This is something where I'm probably not the one that's most qualified for giving good advice. Mag or Magway asks, if you could add one cantrip to D&D, what would it do? And which types of spellcasters would be able to use it? So this is going to be a controversial answer, I think. I think people are going to disagree with me on this, and that's totally fine. I think there should be a cantrip where wizards, warlocks, sorcerers, bards, that kind of class, should be able to counterfeit very small amounts of money. I'm talking like maybe 1 gold piece, where you can turn anything that kind of looks like a coin, like maybe a circular bit of wood, and it would require an investigation check to realize that it is in fact fake money. And I really am thinking just like the small bits of change. And the reason why I want this is because I get so frustrated when it's like, you enter the tavern and you order 4 pints and they say, that'll be 1 gold, please. And then they're like, oh, hang on, oh no. And then they start negotiating, and or they don't have the change, or just having a spell that is basically for rounding errors, provided you don't get in trouble, could be fun. So long as it's a small enough amount of money that it's not going to cause problems. Maybe it should even be concentration. Are there any concentration cantrips? That feels wrong. Like spiritually, that feels incorrect. But certainly you shouldn't be able to make more than 1 of these at a time. So maybe it wears off after a minute. That would be a good way of limiting it pretty naturally. But I just think it could be really cool. And I also think it gives more opportunity for wizards to do stuff like finding coins behind people's ears. I guess it's like a very limited version of Minor Illusion. I have just realized there's a chance there's a spell that already does this and I've totally forgotten, or that this is already a cantrip in some other sourcebook for D&D or a similar system, and so if I have just stolen the idea, then, sorry. Samuel asks, can you give a quick summary of your current D&D campaign so far? I have 2 campaigns at the moment, one that hasn't started and one that's only a few sessions in, so I'll pick the few sessions one, because I simply don't have time to recap my entire first campaign, unless people are really keen to hear it. But that'll be a separate video, I'm sure. So, the players are on their way from the lands of Orlean into the new world called the Malados. We spend a session getting to know the players, and I told them they would have to have at least 1 companion that was with them. But just a week away from their destination, the ship found itself in a terrible storm. And in the very eye of the storm moving towards them was a ship which flew the colours of the cult of Emar. Emar being the god of all magic and the sun, and his cult being a group that believe that Emar is the only god that deserves to be worshipped, and they're getting a little bit crazy about it in the Malados. The Emarian ship stops next to them and their high priest comes aboard. As he demands from the captain all the children on board of the ship, the party begin to hide all of the children aboard the ship. The high priest comes down, talks to them, they manage to convince him that there are no children on the ship. He tells them to go with peace and steps off, and then the Emarian ship opens fire. In the sinking wreck in the midst of this storm centered on the Emarian ship, the players begin to drown. All 4 of them wake up at a crossroads. A man made of smoke offers them 2 choices, to walk back into the freezing waters or to choose life and to do him a small favour. Now, the conceit of this campaign is that every time they died, they would be given this choice, but every time they died, the cost of reviving would be much higher. But they would always have the choice to go back to their death. And then further into the campaign, I have a couple of plans about how they can get themselves out of this contract, but don't worry about that for now. They wake up on the island of Vida, which is a paired island of Mort and Vida, and find themselves in the lovely shack of a woman called Tulip who looks after them, helps them get their strength back, and then they set out for the only port town on these islands called Mortport. On their journey, they come across a band of kobolds who are led by the Great Kazoom, who in the end they throw into the volcano at the top of Vida. They go across Bridgertown, that was a dumb one, and make their way to Mortport. They're accosted by a dwarvish highwayman called Casanova, whose sword they do steal, and find themselves in the town of Mortport without any money or any way of getting anyone to carry them. But there is a ship's captain who's offering them the ability to travel with him to the main city of these islands, provided they help him get an artifact for which he has a bounty. Because all artifacts in this world are collected by my player's previous character, Clarissa Cavendish, who will then pay money if she gets any of these artifacts. This artifact is a cursed idol which keeps the island of Morton Vida in this paired state of death and life. They get the statue, they fight the Banshee, they have a good time, and they return to the ship, which I call the Only Fools and Horsens. They sail south with this captain and his son towards the city of Centilis. On the way, they stop at Alia Bay and go to Lindsay's legit shippery, where the captain tries to betray them and go behind their back. One of the players, who was playing a paladin, gets caught trying to sneakily listen to this conversation. Trouble ensues. Middle, bit of fighting. He ends up in the hold with his son of a ship called the Amethyst. They get to the city of Centilis, and after effectively running a tavern for a night, that was a bit of a weird moment, they figure that in order to get their revenge on the cult of Emar, they need to first find any of the representatives of the real proper navies that actually exist in these oceans. So their first stop is to go and find the tyrant of the city of Centilis. While waiting in his antechamber for a meeting, they come across the Lord Father himself, the leader of the cult of Emar, coming out after doing a little bit of manipulation on the tyrant. They try to fight him. He never used a single damaging spell. He basically just used hold person and command and spells like that to defeat them. And that was where we left off last session, so I'll let you know if anything else happens. Ooh, that was a little bit long. Sorry, everyone. I'm going to add a timestamp at some point so people can skip ahead to this point if they don't want to listen to all that. Tall Platypus asks, who/what is your favourite thing, creature, person that you've made for any setting? So I think my absolute favourite thing is a material that we call blood iron. Basically, in my world, dwarves have a lot of iron in their blood, more than humans. And when a great dwarf dies, a great warrior or a great leader, the iron is removed from their corpse's blood and eventually formed into a new kind of steel. So every ingot of blood iron would actually have in it the blood of lots of dwarven heroes, and then, due to magical nonsense, it's incredibly strong. And so in the first campaign that I ran, where the Dwarven Empire was this huge, historic, world-spanning entity that has since crumbled and collapsed, in some of the deepest and darkest dungeons, you could still find ingots of blood iron. I really loved that idea, and actually related to this, one of my favourite people in the first campaign was Oros the Mountain Spirit, who had a forge in the heart of a volcano, who forged the barbarian a blood great axe, using some of the blood iron they'd recently got from a sleeping red dragon. Fluffy Owlbear asks, what is your favourite moment from running a game? Oh, it's so hard. I don't want to give too much background on all of this. Like, is this portion of the video just going to be 3 hours of the Gorilla of Destiny explaining the background to small things that happened in his D&D campaign? Okay, I'm going to do it. It was my absolute... It's so good. It was such a good betrayal. So one of my players was playing a warlock for the god of death and fate. And as far as he was aware, his entire family had been taken away by the big bad guy. But then, out of nowhere, he finds his younger brother, Triss, the halfling. They're from an adopted found family. It's really cute. I love them so much. And with Triss, they go back and rescue Triss's boyfriend from the bad guys. In doing so, they eventually manage to plot a plan to go and rescue their father, who's being held in a much bigger bad guy base. They get to the tower, they bring a whole load of allies, it's a really big fight, it's amazing, and then they sneak into the lowest level that they know of so far. Foreshadowing. They enter into this dungeon and they find that it's got an obsidian glass floor and this huge iron door in front of them. And just to the right, they can see a smaller room which seems to have a lever and a chain connecting to said door. The rock around it has collapsed, and without thinking, in their rush, they say, Triss, you can go get the lever. So the halfling makes his way through that small gap, looks his brother in the eye, and says, I'm sorry. He pulls the lever, and then as they're falling, I explain to my players all the times when we're going flashing back to him, and he's talking about how he would do anything to keep his family safe, even if it meant making decisions that the rest of the world would judge him for. And it turns out he had sided with the big bad ages ago to try and get all of the players into one place and stop them from foiling his plans, because at this point they'd caused quite a couple of problems. And so his deal was that the big bad could complete his ritual, have him as an apprentice, and he would get to keep his family safe in the confines of this prison. I was shaking as I said, and Triss pulls the lever and the glass floor below you vanishes. Oh, it was mean. I hope that makes sense, but oh my god, it was so delightful. Pretty Bird asks, would you ever want to go LARPing? I think so. I don't really have the time or the money at the moment, but I would be really interested in trying it. I think I'd need to know that I had a couple of really good friends there, and then I'd be able to go, but I don't want to go just on my own, if that makes sense. Tara asks, what got you interested in D&D to begin with? So a friend of mine growing up, his family played D&D every Sunday. It was like a ritual. They always did it. I am so jealous of them now to know how much organization that takes. But he would tell us about it, and then one day I remember just going, okay, I'm going to read the book, and I was captured. It was so cool. It sounded awesome. I just needed people to play it with, and then like 6 or 7 years later, I actually played D&D for the first time. That the Shark asks, as a DM, what is your favorite thing to do with/to your players? And as a player, what are some of your favorite things to do? My answer's kind of the same for both. I love roleplay more than anything. I love fun characters having a wild conversation. Or even better, if the players are having a really serious conversation. I love that. I love it as a DM. I love it as a player. It's the best bit of D&D for me. And I think included in that then is world building and coming up with these characters. So I love world building, but I almost see that as separate to the D&D part, like playing the game. Trust me, if it wasn't boring for my players, I would spend the entire session in the pub. Jackson asks, how do you implement your spell/magic theory and writing into gameplay at the table? I love it as a DM, but I fear it may intimidate my players. So I 100% agree, and actually when it comes to magic theory at my table when I'm DMing, it doesn't come up terribly often. A lot of my players are scientists, and so they could easily understand the concepts if they were keen. But similarly, they're there to have fun and decompress. I'm not going to give them, required reading. So instead, if I want to implement it in game, it's usually as another NPC in the way that they talk, in the way that the world is built. Or when they start asking me questions like, okay, hey, but how would we be able to detect this? Or would we be able to see this effect from a long way away? Having a strong magic theory has really helped give me a foundation for explaining a lot of the things in D&D and helping them as players make decisions or understand bits of the world or find solutions to puzzles. So it's kind of like something that exists in the world in the background, but not something they need to engage with on a one-to-one level. Unless they are keen and they approach me and say, hey, I want to do this thing from your book, in which case I'm also thrilled. Ben R asks, do you watch D&D actual plays like Critical Role or Dimension 20? Would you ever be part of such a thing if given a chance? So I do watch them. I watch the entirety of Critical Role Campaign 3. I have just not had time to watch Campaign 4, which is really sad, but it's like when you're doing a lot of writing, it can be very hard to listen to people talk, and since most of my day is spent writing, that means that I don't really have time to then dedicate to Critical Role. I haven't watched much Dimension 20. I watched the one special that Matt Mercer DM'd for. And honestly, some of the best actual play stuff I've ever seen was the special where Brendan Lee Mulligan came in for Critical Role. Oh my god, it was so good. Like, if I wanted to get someone into actual play D&D or just convince them D&D is a good thing, absolutely that would be where I started them. But my main love, the one that got me into like listening to actual play D&D stuff, was the Adventure Zone. Oh, I love the Adventure Zone. It's so good. I listened to almost all of Balance during my master's degree while I was like studying for that. So it will always have a space in my heart. And the, what was it called? The Ether Sea? I really loved the Ether Sea campaign as well. Now, would I actually want to be a part of these things? I'm not sure. While I think a lot of us have this idea, like, it would be so cool to be a guest on these shows and to, contribute and be known like this, how fun would that be? I'm very aware that I'm not a comedian, I'm not a voice actor or, an actor in general, that I don't have a lot of experience on camera being recorded in the way that they are being recorded. And so while a part of me really wants to say yes, I'm also aware I might just not be a very good fit for that kind of show. So yeah, probably not, but that doesn't mean I'm saying no if, anyone wants to reach out to me. Riggs asks, do you believe that pre-made campaigns from D&D or other people are a viable way to do your story? 100%. I don't do it because I love the world building, but if you don't have time for that or you just don't want to do it, maybe you want to just pick something and go, they're an amazing way of doing it. And because of the way D&D is, if you want to modify it to tell your own story, you absolutely can. They're a resource, but they're not something you have to follow really, really strictly. Like, if all you take is the items, a couple of enemies, and a map, you will be fine. You don't need to follow everything to the letter. It's definitely a good way of getting into D&D if your world building skills are still kind of developing in the space. And finally, Dan asks, what race and class do you prefer to play as? I got asked this one a lot, so sorry to everyone other than Dan who asked this, and I'm not picking yours as the example to show on screen. I really like playing either a human or kind of Goliath, so very tall boy or just a human. And as for class, it's a bit trickier. Obviously, I love playing a wizard. I feel like it gives you a lot of freedom and creativity with your magic. And in the real world, I love solving puzzles, and so it feels like it fits me very well. But on the other hand, I love playing a rogue. I've played a rogue a few times in a few different kind of campaigns or one-shots. Because as I said earlier, I love roleplay much more than combat. And rogues don't have a lot to do in combat. That suits me just fine. But on the other hand, I also love paladins. I think they give some very interesting roleplay if you set your oath to be something like, I will always protect my crew even at harm to myself. Where the oath acts as a fairly simple axiom that you can use to define and decide all of your role-playing choices. And it really helps me stop metagaming and just play a character. So yeah, sorry I couldn't pick just a single one, but I feel like it would be Wizard 1, Rogue 2, and then Paladin 3. Whew. Okay, that one took a bit longer to record than I thought. I'm gonna go get lunch. I hope you're enjoying this as much as I am. I'm enjoying sitting here just recording into my mic, just answers to total nonsense. Okay, new part of the section. I've had lunch. We're going to do this video. My voice isn't even a little bit tired, so we're doing fine. This section is a lot of questions about my spell writing systems. No dilly-dallying, this video's long enough, let's get on with it. Imaginary Beehive asks, how would magic tattoos work, /tattoos with runes on them? So I think this relates a little bit to my city spells because, you know, you make the city, and as I've discussed previously, I don't think necessarily the rune is what's casting the spell. And so if you had a body covered in spell tattoos, it's basically just a very personal spell book. However, I think that's awesome. So the main thing that happens if you get a whole load of magic tattoos on your character is they earn my respect. However, I'm not sure I'm going to recommend people getting tattoos of my actual spells because I get really nervous at the idea that anything I've done would be permanently on someone's body, because then what if I found out I made a big mistake and then, oh, no. So do that at your own caution. Imaginary Beehive also asks, what happens theoretically if so many spells are made that the magic system has no way to write down a new spell without it being the same as another spell? So, to the second point of that, there is actually already a little bit of overlap in the system. I detail all the overlapping ones in the spell saying guide if you have that, but spells like Wall of Force and Wall of Stone have all the same 6 attributes. And so, in the current way that we write down the spells, or, you know, make the words for the spells, they have the overlap there. And so my current solution is that if I was making a spell book and I did have one of these spells overlapping with another one of them, then I would just add some sort of accent or detailer or marker. Though it is very interesting to me that the ones that overlap, another one being like enhanceability and spider climb, they seem to have some very cool thematic overlap, which I would maybe take as a sign that maybe these are just the same spell showing themselves in a different way. Another question, of course, for the wizard system is, what if we have so many of, like, let's say, area types, like areas of effect, that we no longer have the capacity to encode them in this system? Well, actually, basically what we would have to do then is add on another 2 points to our spell symbols. So instead of using 13 points, we'll use 15, and then have to redefine everything, which is really annoying. But I'm pretty sure with 13 symbols, even with like the number of rotationally asymmetric numbers that we limit ourselves to, it's very unlikely we're going to need to do that anytime soon. Maybe one day I'll make a video detailing that. Raven asks, which of the spell writing systems was the most enjoyable to create? Oh, it's so hard to choose. I found the spell writing system so satisfying to make just every time. I love the wizard one for its completeness. I love the druid one because it's based on Ohum, which is this kind of, I think it's early medieval ancient Irish language. I love the Sorcerer one because Stennis made it look so cool, and I love the Warlock one because it added so much depth and complexity to our understanding of spells. And I got to do a little bit of creative writing in it, which I loved the opportunity to do that. So I'm sorry, Raven, I refuse to answer your question. I love them all equally. Sophie asks, a bit too specific, no such thing, not on this channel, but I'm playing as the Circle of Stars Druid in my first ever campaign. How would you go about adapting your amazing Druid spellwriting system so that it can be used with constellations, or should I use the Wizard spellwriting system? Okay, so there's a few ways. With the Druid one, if you want to use the Druid system, you could always have it so that the constellation, so the Druid system works off of 6 spokes on a wheel. So you could always pick 7-star constellations and then in a notebook draw the actual symbols that make up the spell. However, I think the more interesting one, and this is something I have thought about a little bit, is to take 13-star constellations and to use that as your notebook. An idea for a character I had a little while ago was the idea of a wizard who would have a small crystal that if they held up to the stars, because the star positions would be more or less right for the constellations, it would then show what spell he was trying to look at. And so for every constellation, he would have another spell. I call them Stargazer Wizards, but I also think Circle of Stars Druids could very easily use a very similar technique. But yeah, I would recommend using the Wizard system more because it's just that little bit more adaptable to constellations. Cygnus Maximus asks, if you could have any spell embroidered onto your underwear using your spellwriting system and have it actually work, which spell would you choose and why? Does it have to be the underwear? Like, could I do it on my jacket? I feel like that'd be a cool aesthetic. Okay, anyway. I mean, obviously I would pick the wish spell. I would like the idea of being able to make wishes. That seems cool. Or create food and water. So much of my life is spent getting food and preparing food. And if I have time, if I'm on holiday, I love doing that. But if I'm in a rush, no. Having the ability to magically create food, amazing. And see when you're hungover and you're really thirsty and you look to your bedside and you don't have any water left in your bottle or your glass, the ability to create water, oh my god, that would be a lifesaver. And then just another one that actually might be even better is prestidigitation. I can't pronounce it, but boy could I use it in my day-to-day life. It's just really handy. I'm now genuinely considering maybe sewing one of my spells into my jacket. Oh, that'd be quite cool. George asks, can you write spells differently depending on which subclass of wizard you are? Absolutely. In fact, I designed the system with that sort of thing in mind. We want a system where people could take it and add it to their very custom characters, right? Like, it's D&D, you're playing a character that is your own, you don't want it to be the exact same as every other character. And so even though we have a very standard way of writing it, which is how I explain everything, you can do things like move all the dots around or change the way the lines are connected. Or even way more advanced things like having different wavelengths of light on a simpler shape all overlapping and then using a sliding spectrometer kind of thing. That could be very cool. So long as you can read the original binary numbers, it really doesn't matter what you do with the symbol. So yes, absolutely. I think different subclasses of wizard would have a big impact on that, as well as just your character and what kind of wizard you're playing. Tom asks, how is your work connected to real-life sacred geometry? Clearly some aesthetic connections, but I'm curious if you've integrated the mathematics of Plato, Euclid, and the like. Honestly, it is entirely a coincidence. I mean, it's not a surprise that you would come up with the same things, right? Because sacred geometry, I've not actually looked into it, but at least, aesthetically, it's like, right, yeah, it's a polygon with all the vertexes connected. So, of course, my spellwriting system, which is all about connecting the vertices of a polygon, will look quite similar. But there is no connection and definitely no mathematical integration. Miriam asks, is there a language to your magic systems? Like each dot means something, but in relation to this other dot it means something else. Like, are there verbs? No, not at the moment. So maybe there's a way you can make a conlang out of the system I've made. But realistically, people ask me this a lot. They're like, what do the dots mean? What do maybe the different connections have these meaning? They just mean ones and zeros. It really is just a way of encoding binary information into a way that's more visual and looks a little bit more magical. In some ways, I always feel like when someone says like, what do the dots represent? It's the same kind of question as like, what do the lines on the paper mean? Where it's like, they don't mean anything. You put the writing on there. That's where the writing goes. So not at the moment. Though, as I say, I'm sure someone could make a conlang or something out of this system if they really wanted to. I'm probably not the one that's going to do it though. Rebigo asks, your spell writing system is similar to a manga called Witch Hat Atelier. Atelier? I don't know. I'm answering this already. I was wondering if you have read it and what your thoughts on it were, / if you had any inspiration. No, I haven't seen it before. I've had it a lot in the comments of my videos, but I've never actually looked into it, so I don't know what the similarities are, but I mean, I'm sure there are some. Stranger asks, how would a magic item written using your spell writing formula look like? So at the moment, the spell writing system wouldn't imbue any magic into an object, though there is some talk about maybe you would automatically imbue the magic into the item just by doing the writing, like by focusing in that way, you will end up enchanting it. But I think magic items, magic weapons, all these different things will be totally different than the writing system that I've got right now. What we have is effectively just notation for people to read and understand, but it doesn't inherently do any of the actual casting. That said, I don't think just because, that's the really hard rules of it all, right? Like that's the foundational, real theory-based idea. That doesn't mean if you want to make a magic item that works in this way, you can't. You absolutely can, and it might be really, really cool. We're here to have fun. First and foremost, we're here to have fun. And if that's more fun for you than my very strict, no, the rune isn't doing the casting, then go ahead. I mean, with the spell cities, that's kind of what I'm doing to myself. I'm like, this is more fun in this setting if I allow this to be the case. Even if, by my own rules, it isn't strictly what we're describing. Tillis asks, how would you go about writing a 10th level spell? So one of the cool things, I'll probably talk about this in a bigger video about spell writing, which I'm really hoping to make. I have actually been doing a lot of the work for, but it's a big project. But effectively, you just use the next binary number up on the list, and so there is already a symbol for 10th level spells. I've just not included it in the books because you don't have any in the dictionary itself. The spell writing guide book goes into this a little bit more if you don't want to wait for the video. Joran S asks, will you be making a compendium for Artificer? Probably not. Not because I don't like Artificers, I do like Artificers, they're really cool, but the Artificer class isn't one of the things that we have permission as creators to use freely. So if you look up D&D, there is something called the System Reference Document, the SRD, and that in of itself is now Creative Commons, which is really good, and is basically what allows me to do all of the things that I do. But I can only do things that I've been given permission to through the SRD, which doesn't include Artificers, so unless I get special permission to do it, which I highly doubt, I probably won't be doing any of these compendiums for Artificers, but thank you for asking. Buppy Warlock asks, what would you do for a Ranger spell writing system? So I have been thinking about this, though I don't have anything put down in very strict terms yet, but my idea is that Rangers, they're very in tune with nature. I would really like it to be something that feels like it's growing and getting more complex, like almost, if you look at the language from the Outer Wilds, I think that's the sort of vibe that I would want to be going for a Ranger system. Another option is maybe focusing on something that's easy to carve into trees or rocks, since that is what Rangers will be doing a lot of the time. But I think they're a little bit down the road. First, I need to do clerics and paladins, and then I'll maybe think about doing the same for rangers. Obvious Pseudonym says, what inspired you to create the magic writing system? Was it something that popped into your head, or was there a real-world inspiration behind it? I don't remember. I can't remember if there was something that set it off for me, but honestly, sometimes I will just have an idea and I'll vocalize it on TikTok or YouTube or whatever, and then if it gets traction, I will just keep following that idea for as long as it can. So there's a really good chance I was just in my head, sat down somewhere doing something thinking, oh, I wonder if there's a way of making a system that you could write down spells, and then the rest is history. Okay, now we're moving on to the section that's all about world building. I feel like some of these overlap with map making as well, but it's fine, it's all arbitrary anyway. I just need to answer as many questions as I can before I die. Maybe this video is a more interesting study into my psyche and the way that I deal with having to do a lot of work that I've never had to do before. This is the longest I've ever had to record myself speaking for. Let me tell you, I thought this would be easy. It is bizarre. Anyway, enough of that. Let's talk about world building. Fluffy Owlbear asks, which of your cities would you go to if you could, brackets, if any, for a day? What about if you could only go one way? Oh, this again, it's tough. It's not about my favorite city, it's about which would I want to go to. So if it's not a one-way trip, I would love to go to the city of Duve, whose map I will put up now. It's a multi-layered dwarven city. I think it looks really cool. It's a bit of an old map, but I love the concept of it, so well done me. But if it was a one-way trip... Okay, so it's not a city, but it is the town of Smiltness, which has on the mountains around it, there are 13 peaks, which after the spellwriting bit, hopefully you understand the meaning of that. The town has control weather cast over it, and basically just has perfect weather all the time. And it would mean getting to live, I imagine it being somewhere that's very much like the Scottish Highlands, so I would very much enjoy living there. I like a lot of hills to climb, and that's basically all this town has. Mission Luna asks, do I have any long-term world-building projects for D&D or otherwise? If so, what's it called? So actually, a lot of what I do is all within the same world, same universe. So that would be, and I'm going to put these up on the map in their kind of relative positions. We have Orlean, which is where my first campaign was, the Malados, which is my second, and then the Stelly Tiles, which is my third. These are all in the same world map. But I don't have a name for this world, it's just the world where I put all of my stories and all of my D&D. But I do have a lot of maps at this point. I think if you go to my website, there's a page called the Atlas, which actually has a lot of the maps and shows you where everything is, so if you want to explore this long-term project of mine, you can. I don't have much written about it that you can access, but trust me, there's a lot. And sort of related to that, Theo asks, do you have plans to make a setting guide? If not for your main world, just the University of Theoretical Magic would be interesting and could come with a stat block for the Gorilla of Destiny. So I have actually dipped my toes in this already before. I've actually got, I think on DriveThruRPG, a setting guide for one of my cities called Aloda. And I loved writing it, so if people find that interesting, I will write more. But the reason I haven't really talked about it more is because it doesn't come up very much in my science work. And it didn't sell a lot of copies. But if there's interest, then maybe I'll look into doing it again. I would love to do it though. Absolutely, 100%. I would love to. It's just whether or not it's feasible for the amount of time and investment I need to put into these things. Oscar asks, what is your biggest recommendation for structuring world building? So I'm a big believer, and I've talked about this with map making. Again, very similar vibe. Start with the big stuff first. The little stuff will then fall into place as you, as a storyteller, or as your players, as, you know, they are also the storyteller, I guess, as they explore the world and find those little details. If you want a really good example of this, I highly recommend reading Discworld. The world is a disc carried on the backs of 4 elephants carried on the back of a massive space turtle. And then from there, Terry Pratchett builds this amazing world that all the stories can take place in. So try and start with a foundation, and then from there build up an understanding of all the finer things. Don't worry about the functional, semi-functional stuff. Just start basic and broad, and then work your way up. Imaginary Beehive asks, so I wanted to ask about the Dwarven Sun City you mentioned in a newer video. You mentioned that the path leading to it has glowing mushrooms somehow indicating night and day. But I wanted to ask, why would the roots glow in correspondence to the day-night cycle? This is something that I've had in my D&D world for a long time, but I have no real understanding or justification as to why it works. Basically, on the surface, there are these plants, and I think mushroom is the best idea for them, that are crystalline in structure, a little bit transparent, and their roots are kind of like fiber optics. Or I think the correct term is their mycelia, but basically they transport light from the surface and then down into the actual structures of these dwarven cities. And so if you find these roots, you can add things like maybe a crystal or a bit of glass in order to diffuse this light and cause a gentle glowing that relates to night and day. As I say, I've had this in my world for a long time. I don't really know how realistic it all is, but we're talking about mushrooms in a magic world, so I think it's okay. Casual Andy 28 asks, what are some of the most important features / places in a city? There's a few big things I always try and include. One is a university. If it's a big city, there's probably going to be some sort of central learning place. This might just be religious in nature. That's totally fine as well, but some big institution. On top of that, you're going to want some central administrative buildings. This could be a keep in the center of the town, or it could be a big council office. And I think the final must-have as a feature of interest in a city is somewhere where merchants go. Cities live and die on trade, and so it's really important to remember that when you're designing cities. So this includes things like your big roads into the city, maybe there's a dockyard, where can people hold markets, is there a big bank, stuff like that. And as always, if you start with these big features, the smaller ones start to make sense. On a personal note, since I'm Scottish, I also always try and include plenty of pubs and places where alcohol is made. Because unfortunately for me, that's kind of the defining feature of a city to me. But obviously you don't need to name every pub. I think within 2 minutes of where I am sat right now, there are at least 10 to 20 pubs. We don't have time for that when we're making our maps or our worlds. And if you're looking for ideas of what to put in your city, genuinely one of the best things is, if you can, travel to another city. See what they have there, what do they do differently, what things do all cities have in common. You'll obviously always find exceptions to any rules that you make, but in general you'll start to find things that you like, as well as finding really cool things that make every city unique. But yeah, it is difficult, especially for a game. I wouldn't worry about it too much. If you leave a lot of blank space and then they say, where is the tax office? And you go, oh no, I forgot about tax offices. You can just say there's, make it up. It's fine. And finally, Miriam asks, what led you to create such an in-depth world? Simple answer, D&D games and very annoying players that asked a lot of questions. Oh, I love them, really. Right, we're in the home straight now. We're getting through this. Well done, everyone who's been watching this whole thing. You're watching me slowly get mad, but that's okay. That's what life's about, Now we're going to be answering all the questions people were asking me about my fonts, which, if you don't know, is something I've been doing very recently. It's all about what I call elfish and dwarfish. Basically just very simple languages that I can use for making some maps. I'll put an example that uses elfish up here. Jacob asks, when is the release of elvish and dwarvish fonts scheduled? Scheduled? I'm not that organized, are you kidding? No, for real, at the moment there's no real release date. The dwarf-ish one will probably come first because the elfish one will require a little bit more work from an actual graphic designer. And then I can only really justify spending all the money on that if I know for sure that it's going to be received well enough. And so the dwarvish one is kind of my test run for that. And in theory should be a lot easier just to get the vector graphics for. But we will see. I certainly wouldn't expect them eminently, is the only thing I can say. Codemaster017 asks, can you read and write with your script fluently? Not yet, though I have noticed as I'm making maps using them that I start remembering what the different symbols are, because it's just a glyphing, right, of English letters to these kind of symbols. And so there are ways of remembering it. And so while I'm not fluent, it is weird to notice that I'm getting there. Though the dwarf one is significantly easier, I will say that. Tobiah asks, have you done or have you ever thought about doing a conlang to go along with your scripts? I haven't. I actually don't know how you make a conlang. It feels like a whole nother field that I would have to learn. And I'm certainly not opposed to that, so I might do it at a future date, but at least for now, I'm way too tired and way too busy. Maybe after my PhD is done, I might look at it a bit more seriously, but to be honest, for now, all I really needed it for was to, act as a way I could draw maps using these interesting kind of scripts. And so a language is like a whole other monster. Vixen asks, how did you come up with the style for your custom script? So for both of Dwarfish and Elfish, I think the way that you can do these things and make it quite interesting is to say, okay, well, here's the vibe I want. I'm now going to try and make simple rules that all the letters have to follow. And then within those constraints, you get really creative. So actually the hardest bit for coming up with the style is to identify the kind of vibe you want and then to come up with rules. And that's the bit that helped me a lot. Like, it's simultaneously the most useful and the most difficult bit, if that makes any sense. Riggs asks, have you thought about making a new tab on your website for different English scripts? Oh, I want to so bad. I would love to be able to release for all the books that I've done, just upload a version that's like, here is the elfish version of this text. I just think it would look really cool. But that would require making the font, and as I say, I wouldn't expect that anytime too soon. And finally, Celeste asks, what script that you've written so far is your favourite? I think it's got to be Elfish. I absolutely love it. I think it's so fun. It looks amazing on maps, which again was the original intention behind it. And so it's really doing what I want it to do. And that to me is very satisfying. It's like I wanted this solved. I made a thing. It solved the thing. I love that. And also I just think it looks prettier. So this section, probably one of the shorter ones, is about future works and future content that I'm going to be doing. So I'm putting future works and content together in the same place. Raven asks, will there be a hardcover version of your books? So this one did get asked a lot, so I can kind of blanket answer this type of question. Probably, maybe, I hope so one day. The problem is all my individual science ones at the moment just aren't that long, like they're maximum 20 to 30 pages, which is totally fine for what they are. But if you want to do a hardcover book, it's way too thin to justify the like hardcover printing costs. Like, I wouldn't be very happy selling people a book that is 20 pages long but costs like 25 to 35 pounds. But those costs are mostly for things like the cover and the binding. And so as you increase the number of pages, I think the value for money goes up. And so one of my big plans that I'm kind of coming up with and trying to organize things for at the moment is to put all of my theory of magic stuff into one massive book, do it all up, get it in a really nice format, and then sell that as a hardcover. That will take a lot of time, and there's actually some science I still need to do so that I can answer this. Like, I want it to include in one section all my spell writing systems, maybe. We'll see how the sizes of the books come out. Like, maybe all the spell writing ones will be a separate hardcover, that's also totally fine by me. But definitely, I want to compile things into one big book. This will also take a lot of artwork and, just general niceness of things to make it look proper, so I might have to do another Kickstarter for it. So yay! Other than, the Patreon and all the books, there's another way you can give me your money! Yay! If I wasn't lazy at editing videos, I would then add the birthday cheer.mp3, but I'm not going to do that, so if you could all just imagine that for me, thanks. Brendan asks, where is Shrek video for 100k? For those of you that don't know, when I hit 1,000 followers, I promised to my friend that I would make a map of the Shrek world. And I originally did this as a joke because I never thought I'd reach 1,000 followers. And I mentioned this in my 100,000, oh my god, what do I do for this video? And people have reminded me. So the way I'm interpreting it is, I still have to do the Shrek one for 1,000 followers. This video here is 100,000. It will be coming eventually. I just don't know how I feel about having to re-watch Shrek the Third. Sophie asks, how likely is a scientific journal to go ahead, and would you accept an article on wild shape from someone who is not a specialist but thinks too much about science and maths? So I want the journal to go ahead, but there's a few considerations that I think need to be taken. One is to think about what is my goal for this journal. And for those that don't know, the idea is to try and take some real-life researchers and give them a chance to talk about their research in a D&D context. And so while I really like the idea of a wild shape paper, I feel like what I really want to do is make sure I get some real researchers the opportunity to talk about their real life science. At the moment, I would say there's a 50-50 chance of it going ahead or not. Yoav asks, can you please talk about more complex science stuff? Yes, I would really like to. It's definitely something that once I can put a bit more time, after my PhD into learning some of the more complicated stuff, or in some cases with physics, I'd be relearning it. I do still have all my notes from my master's, but I'd love to start making way more in-depth, long-form videos about really complicated topics. Manu asks, I wanted to know if you'd be interested in being a guest speaker at a university. I don't know. It might end up with, it depends on the university, right? Things like travel and whether or not it would be interesting for me to make that kind of connection with people. I have given a lot of talks throughout my PhD. It's a very normal part of doing a PhD, but I've never considered that I would ever talk about this at a university at a proper level. So at the moment, I don't know. Zomplex asks, do you think there are more people subscribed for the math or the D&D part? I actually don't know, so sound off in the comments which bit you're here for. I am very interested myself. And then finally, Gizmo the Noodle Mages asks, what will be the last D&D class you'd make a book on, and why do you plan on avoiding it? So the last one I'm probably going to do is the Bard, and this is like class specific rather than general D&D science. And I think part of it is because I love music, I love the way that you can use music to express yourself, but it is very complicated, and there's a lot of different avenues of how a bard might be expressing themselves that I really want to be able to take the time to look at and enjoy, but I think that's going to be a way more complicated task than most of my spell writing systems. I mean, even if we just take the classic view of a bard as someone that's making music, you could be looking at the melody, you could be looking at the chords or the percussion, and then do these things all meld together. How could you maybe get like sheet music for a bard spell? And then on top of that, is that sheet music something I can make programmatically? Because that would save me a lot of time. Otherwise, I'm going to be having a very, very long month of trying to write all these spells down, and I will make a lot more mistakes that way. So it will be Bard last just because I think it deserves the time to actually really make this system in depth, but also because there's a few more technical things that I need to figure out. Whew. All right, we're nearly there. Okay. Right, I think this will be the last section. I'm going to roll in several things, including my PhD, people's question about my general education, and then I'm also going to answer the big question, why am I named the Gorilla of Destiny? Which has been a constant question I've been getting asked for years now. Nina asks, what do you want to do after your PhD? I don't know. The economy is not in a great place and the job market is bad. I've had a few interviews for a couple of data analysis jobs, but if I'm being totally honest, if I could make a career out of these books and the things I do on here, I would absolutely love to do that. And given the current state of the world, there's a chance that I'm not going to have a choice but to try and make a really honest go of this after I've finished my PhD. I mean, as of right now, I do not have a full-time job and my PhD funding has run out. So this is my primary source of income right now. So now's as good a time as any. We're probably quite far into the video. I don't know how far because I'm recording these all on separate files, but I should plug this probably earlier as well. I have a Patreon now. If you like the work I do and want to support it and are able to, then feel free to support me there. Again, no pressure if you're not able to. Times are tough, I know. But also you can support me by buying any of my books. That also really helps. And if you can't do any of that, don't worry. Just liking and sharing videos, that is also a massive help to me. But the Patreon is the best way because it does give me a bit more of a stable income. And that is one of the most difficult things about trying to make essentially freelance publishing your job. Ben asks, what was your road in education up until where you are now? So I started, as you might expect, in school. My hires and advanced hires were basically like really, really maths and science focused. In our school, you had to do higher English, and I actually managed to do that because of an amazing teacher. Thank you, Mrs. Waters, so much. At the time, I don't think I appreciated it, but now that I have to do a lot more writing and I really enjoy poetry, I'm very glad I had to sit in that class. And then I also did a lot of music in school as well. But I mostly just did physics, maths, anything with those two things. I then got into university for physics. And in Scotland, we do 4-year degrees. First and second year kicked my ass. Second year more than first, because first year overlaps a lot with what you do in advanced higher. But second year maths genuinely really, really sucked for me. I think it was the first time where suddenly, because you're in a class of your peers, of people that all did very well in school in maths, the pace picked up a lot, and suddenly I couldn't afford to be lazy in class, and I barely realised that. So my maths grade at the end of first year was a C3, which gave me a huge panic. So then I studied really hard, I thought, and then my next grade in second year was a D1, and then for the final semester of the year 2, I got a D3, and oh my god, that was so scary for me. For the longest time, I really just thought, oh, I guess I'm just not that good at this stuff. I've been an imposter up till now. I'm rubbish at maths. I don't know any of the physics they're teaching me. It's all very weird and scary, and I was quite upset, as you can imagine. The fun fact that you kind of don't realise till after the fact is that everyone was feeling that. And so going into third year physics, me and my friends, we were like, okay, we're going to lock in. We're going to be making sure we actually study. We're going to be writing out all the lecture notes. And so at the end of third year, I actually managed to qualify for the integrated masters. I then did my master's in physics with astrophysics, where basically all of my classes were on quantum theory, and then in my final semester I did relativistic quantum field theory, and decided I wanted to do no more quantum mechanics. But by that point I knew I wanted to do a PhD. And so I was talking to my master's supervisor. I actually applied for the group that he worked in. I panicked, bombed the interview, and then after the fact he said, "Oh, by the way, I do have a company that we sometimes do research with and they're offering a PhD position. Would you like to apply for it?" I checked that it wasn't weapons. It's not. And then that's how I got my PhD position. In a lot of ways, it feels like I lucked into it. But in other ways, you often make this luck for yourself. I worked very well with my master's supervisor, which was just kind of lucky, but that then meant he wanted to recommend me for a PhD position that he would then be supervising as well. And so I always have this weird thing of like, yes, I completely lucked my way into this blah 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 imposter whatever. But also there is still a lot of hard work that got me to this position. So yeah, I guess to summarize, my entire path of my education has been nothing but support from very close friends and family. And to be quite frank, a huge amount of luck. But that said, luck can only do so much. If I was to give any advice for anyone going into any sort of studying at any higher level, it would be to make friends that are doing the same classes as you and talk to them about it. Explain things to each other. Sometimes the best way of learning how something works is by having to explain it to another person. And so having that support group around you not only means you have all the emotional support you need, but it also makes sure you have colleagues and peers that you can reach out to and try and explain to, and then hopefully help you both grow and understand. And it gives you people to go to the pub with after you're done studying. Sorry, that was a long one. Henry asks, what inspired you to seek higher education and by extension in your specific field? Honestly, I feel like I just had a real affinity for maths and physics in school, and so I early on decided I want to be a physicist, and then I started reading books by Carl Sagan, and that really made me go, okay, I want to be an astronomer. Space is just so cool, and it's so fascinating, and it's so inspiring that I was like, whatever I do, I want to contribute to that in some way. Nick asks, do I have any advice for succeeding in university physics courses? So on top of the advice I gave earlier about making sure you have peers and colleagues you can talk to, one really big bit of advice is to learn to play with the maths a little bit. This really helped me, but sometimes, especially when you're going into high-level physics like general relativity or quantum mechanics, the broad general theory can be so overwhelming at first that I found one of the best ways of getting your head around it is to just say, okay, let's create a scenario, let's take all these variables and just say, that's equal to 1, that's equal to 2, and this is my value x, let's plot that, let's see what happens. Sometimes people say the best way of understanding how something works is to break it, and I really think with the physics and the maths, that's very true. So yeah, my bit of advice, learn how to play with equations. And then once you're good at that, learn how to combine different equations together. You'll probably do that in your course very naturally. But it is something that can be very interesting and quite cool to do yourself, and it will help you understand the underlying theory a lot better. Tom asks, how's PhD stuff coming? So for those of you that don't know, the way a PhD works typically is that you do an amount of research for a number of years, and then you compile it all into one massive book called your thesis, and then that gets read by a couple of examiners who will sit you down in a room and then... Okay, as a joke, I was going to say beat you to death. That's what it feels like. In fact, they're just challenging you, making sure you understand what you've written, making sure you're the one that did the research, and making sure there's no major flaws in what you've done. This is called the Viva, and it's usually about 3 hours long, though sometimes it stretches to 5. And the exact setup of Vivas changes quite a lot depending what country you're in. But in the UK, it's quite nasty. Not the nastiest, but quite nasty. After this, you then get sent away, so if you pass the Viva, you will have some amount of corrections. Most of the time this will be minor corrections, so things like your grammar, colours of your plots, small things that you can fix pretty quickly. And sometimes you get sent away with major corrections where you might have to redo an experiment. I'm currently in a weird limbo space where I finished the first draft of my entire thesis. It's about 304 pages long. and my supervisors are giving it a final read through for, comments that I can put in before submitting it for my final Viva submission. So I'm very stressed. I don't know how to say it other than I am very, very stressed. And I'm only just now realizing how stressed I've been for quite a long time. So that's fun. I'm going to be making sure to take plenty of time to rest after I submit my thesis, and probably again after my Viva. Zexter asks, will you share your doctorate paper once you finish it? Probably not. So, well, I say probably not. I won't be allowed to for at least 5 years. Because my PhD is partially funded by a company, I can't really talk about the specifics of what I've researched. I can broadly maybe discuss the topic it was on, but I really can't share any of the results or any of the intellectual property held within. And not only that, it's really advanced, and worse, really boring. Frankly, I don't think anyone should ever have to read it. It's terrible. And finally, Polina asks, what is your motivation to go through some rough patches and finish your PhD? Maybe you have a catchphrase to keep moving forwards? I don't think I have a catchphrase, though I do say the word alas a lot when I'm having a really bad time. For example, I might say, yeah, another paper got rejected. Alas. And then I just move on. But it is really important for any degree, not just a PhD, but a lot of them, you will have rough patches. And I think PhDs are just notorious for being long enough and, difficult enough that you will end up having quite a lot of quite serious rough patches. I did talk about it a bit earlier, but one of the first things you need to do if you're having a bad, instant is to take a moment to breathe and to just try and recontextualize things. That helps a lot. I mean, a lot of motivation is just having the discipline to keep going. Like, there are a lot of days where if I ask myself, why am I actually doing this? I probably wouldn't have gone into work. And sometimes it's easier just to say, I have to go into work today. But I cannot emphasize enough, that is not going to be enough. Support networks, looking after your health physically and mentally, and taking time off. They are what are going to get people through a PhD, much more than anything else. And with that, I'm now going to answer the final question, or group of questions, that I really want to talk about just before I finish, and something a bit more light-hearted. Why am I called the Gorilla of Destiny? The name traces way back to when I was 10 or 11. Me and my younger brother, we both used to do karate. And one summer they were like, okay, we're going to just do a fun sports day competition for everyone. So we were divided into teams. Me and my brother were on one team together. And we got told we had to come up with a team name. And so I, in my apparent infinite wisdom, told my brother to think of an animal, and then I would think of, some other word, so it was animal of whatever word I thought of. And so when they came around and said, okay guys, what is your team name? My brother said gorilla, and I said of destiny. And then the name just kind of stuck with me, and so when I made to make a TikTok account, I was like, oh, I'll just use this name again. And now I'm here as the Gorilla of Destiny. I kind of wish there was maybe a deeper reason or something really clever about me that made it out. Or people ask me, is it intentional that it's an acronym for God? No, it really wasn't. It was just two dumb kids thinking of an animal in a word. And with that, I've answered a lot of questions. This has been very odd for me, so you've had hints throughout the video. I've basically just sat down and recorded all of this in one working day. My voice is very tired. But I do just want to thank you all very much. The reason I'm making this is because I hit 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. I never thought it would get this far. Not once, not ever. The support and the patience that you as a community have shown me, the curiosity and inquisitiveness that people always just seem to bring to every nonsense topic I talk about, it has made this so enjoyable. I like to think, and I do tell myself, even if no one was listening, I'd probably still be doing these projects, maybe not to the same scale, but I would still be working on them. But it is really you guys, the people in my comments, the people who message me, who are in my emails or supporting me in any way they can. You're the people that have made this as amazing as it is, who have helped it be more than just me writing books or playing with ideas and turned it into something I can be really passionate about. No man is an island and no content creator is anything without their audience. And I'm very lucky to have the amazing audience that I do have now. So genuinely, thank you to all of you. As a joke, I was considering saying thank you literally 100,000 times, but then I thought that's not fair on my TikTok followers, so I'd probably have to say it like 250,000 times at least. And that sounds too much for me. If you like my work and you want to support it, as I said, liking and sharing is absolutely fine. That is everything I could ask you. But buying my books or subscribing to my Patreon is another way that really helps me keep doing this, and I do really appreciate just about everything. It all feels surreal to me. So, thank you all very much for watching. I hope I answered enough questions and gave you a bit of insight into who I am. But yeah, have a lovely day. Thank you. Bye.